What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Slaw Sports Show. I'm your host, Cole Noble, aka Slaw, here for another episode of our NFL season previews, breakdowns, divisional by divisional that we've been doing the last couple of weeks. We have two more left. Today's episode discussing the AFC North, and next week's episode concluding with the NFC North, and then we'll get right into it. Break down every single game on our notes, and then we will come to you live in 2 weeks, so not next week, but the week after, and we will be giving our record prediction preview for all 32 teams, playoff predictions, wild card predictions. All of that will be broken down in a tier list for all 32 teams within their divisions. Now that we are getting close to wrapping up all 8 divisions in the National Football League, so as you can see in today's header, we will be discussing the AFC North today. So it's an exciting one to talk about. It's been a lot of talk of the town throughout the entire offseason, mainly being one guy in particular making his way into the division this year with the Cleveland Browns in Deshawn Watson. So, of course, we will be giving a Deshawn Watson update. Big news week for him, last week and into this week as well to discuss with the future, for this season. If you want to talk about the season preview for, this division, the Browns, the league in general, we have to figure out what the case is going to be with Deshawn Watson going forward with the Cleveland Browns this year as their starting quarterback, and if he will be the starting quarterback with the Cleveland Browns this year. So finally, we're getting around to it, and we will be discussing the Deshawn Watson situation. What's the current state of the situation? What's to come? What's expected with the decision upcoming with Deshawn Watson, and all of that. But before we get started with the Browns and with Deshawn Watson, first and foremost, thank you all for joining the Slaw Sports Show. You guys are the best, always stopping by every single time we do the show, picking it up whenever we have it uploaded as well on the channel, picking up on the podcast, anywhere you go, at the Slaw Sports Show, on anywhere you get a podcast. You guys are the best. For those of you tuning in live on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Why not? You're already here. Hit the like button as well. Hit the notification bell so you know when we're live each and every week. All of that goes a long way towards supporting the channel and continuing growing the network that we're building here on the Slaw Sports Show. So with that being said, and the thanks and appreciation to all of you guys, we're going to go ahead and get started breaking down this division, breaking down these 4 teams. Has some training camp clips. We got some training camp notes from the beat writers. All that stuff to discuss, and just ultimately the roster implications, what to watch for this season out of these 4 teams, and ultimately what's the stake of this division. What are they going to look like this year? Are we going to have another Super Bowl contender, another Super Bowl team representing the AFC this year again out of this division? All of that we will be discussing here on the show. So let's go ahead and get started with the big news and the hot name throughout the entire offseason cycle. Let's start with the Cleveland Browns and Deshawn Watson. So what is going on right now with Deshawn Watson? We saw the suspension. Now everyone immediately went to it. A 6-game suspension that Judge Sue L. Robinson placed down on Deshawn Watson. Everyone thought, it seemed like everyone thought that was the done deal. That is not the case. It is not a done deal with Deshawn Watson. The 6-game suspension was the initial, ruling on Deshawn Watson. But the NFL right now is appealing the 6-game suspension. They're going to try to have it due by the end of the day today, according to Mary Kay Cabot, a big insider with the Cleveland Browns beat writer for Cleveland.com. She's always on top of everything Cleveland. So she says that it will be due, the NFL's appeal, by the end of the day today. And the NFL is appealing for an indefinite suspension that would be a minimum of 1 year. Perhaps even more significant given the structure of Watson's contract. That coming from Jeff Darlington, ESPN NFL reporter. So that is the current state of Deshawn Watson. No, it will not be a 6-game suspension. Expect it to be longer. Personally, I was just thinking of maybe the route of what the NFL initially wanted to do with Deshaun Watson, and that being the 12-game, I think it was $10 million settlement that they had in line if Deshaun Watson, settled with the NFL, but ultimately decided not to. I figured that would, end up being the case because right now this is a battle between the NFL and the NFLPA right now of how long the suspension will be for Deshaun Watson. But the NFL, again, like I said, wants this to be an indefinite suspension, a year-long suspension that they were going to have to review and try to implement for him to keep him off the field for the entire year this year. So right now, currently a 6-game suspension, currently due by the end of today, is the NFL appeal, and we'll see what the NFL has to say about Deshaun Watson here in the next few hours, you'd have to think, leading up to the end of the week. So what does this mean for the Cleveland Browns? I mean, obviously, they put a lot of capital into Deshaun Watson, being their starting quarterback for this team, being their franchise guy for this team. Probably not going to be this season, but nevertheless, when Deshaun Watson comes back, he's going to step foot as being one of the top passers in the National Football League, and trying to get back to the top of his game that he was having back with the Houston Texans. Now that he hopefully will get back onto the field, and Deshaun Watson's mentality and his perspective, wanting to get back on the field, hopefully sooner than later. But with the NFL, they're going to try to battle this out for as long as possible until they have a right decision and something that they believe in is true to the cause with this Deshaun Watson case. So for the Cleveland Browns this year, however long it's going to be, 6 games, 12 games, the full season, they will have to be turning their attention to getting Jacoby Brissett ready for game action, ready to take the field as a starting quarterback for this team. They went out and got Josh Rosen as the backup. They still have Josh Dobbs on the roster as well. But right now, their sole idea should be getting Jacoby Brissett on the field and ready to go with the ones and ready for game action come week 1, which is very interesting because the Cleveland Browns are wanting Deshaun Watson to have some preseason action. From what I know, and I've read through the beat writers, Deshaun Watson's still getting all the reps with the first team. So it's just very confusing to me why you're not getting Jacoby Brissett ready to go with the starters, with the one team, if he is going to be your starting quarterback for a huge chunk of the season. He's going to be the guy that's going to be taking over for this team. So Jacoby Brissett, being the starting quarterback, that's what we're watching out for. With the Cleveland Browns right now in practice is trying to see him eventually get some reps with the ones, and start building a repertoire, see who he does build a repertoire with out of this starting group until they figure things out with Deshaun Watson, however long that will be this season. But if we want to get a good look at this offense, it's not really something we're getting right now out of training camp of how the starting offense, the starting group that they will put out week 1 will look and mesh together in week 1 with Jacoby Brissett under center. So that's what I want to start watching for, especially after today, if we can start getting some official news from the NFL on the Deshaun Watson front and into the rest of training camp and upcoming with the practices and into preseason in the next couple of weeks. See who Jacoby Brissett starts to lean on within this offense. So let's shift now and talk about some of these guys in this offense. And first, let's start with Nick Chubb, because with Deshaun Watson out of the picture for a considerable, if not the entire season, fire up Nick Chubb. Fire him up in this offense. Nick Chubb is a beast, and I expect him to have a big year this year with no Deshaun Watson in the picture. Nick Chubb will be the main and heavy focal point of this offense under Kevin Stefanski. Within this offense last year, had over 1,200 yards, nearly 1,300 yards on the ground with 8 touchdowns. This guy was a factor on the ground in the run game, played 14 games. Yes, Kareem Hunt will still be a factor in that backfield, but Nick Chubb is going to have a heavy share of the workload, and they're going to use him a lot and really often in this offense, you'd have to think. So I'm excited to see him get into some action in the preseason and see how much more of an impact that he has on this team this year within this offense. But in the passing game, the Cleveland Browns get a big upgrade this offseason at the wide receiver position, bringing in a new number 1 wide receiver into the fold in Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper coming over from the Dallas Cowboys, had a little bit of, sustainability issues with the Cowboys, staying on the field. He's already not practicing a little bit with the Cleveland Browns. I'm not personally worried about him. I think he's going to be ready to go come game time. And, this is a guy who's, due for 1,000 yards every single season, it seems like, where he's fully healthy, playing, at least 15 games in the season. So Amari Cooper's, he's going to be that guy in this offense, being that number one wide receiver, and the receiver that they traded for him to be in this offense for Jacoby Brissett. And honestly, personally, I think Amari Cooper, if he stays healthy, he's going to be a consistent force on the field as this number one wide receiver. Personally, I'm looking at the depth of this wide receiver position because there's some guys on here who are starting to make some plays in training camp, and there's also some guys who aren't that you might want to start worrying about here. But Donovan Peoples-Jones right now looking like the surefire number two of this offense. But you got rookie wide receiver David Bell. You got second-year wide receiver Anthony Schwartz out of Auburn. You got Jakeem Grant. You got Michael Woods. Those two guys have been making plays in training camp as well. So I want to see how the rest of this wide receiver roster comes into place. I know that there's a lot of big headlines early on surrounding David Bell, the rookie, and what he was able to do so far in training camp. But right now he is currently injured and out of practice with a foot injury, which sidelined him on 8 days ago. So he's missed a big chunk of training camp so far. Back in minicamp, David Bell was a big focal point that a lot of headlines were on. But David Bell's still a guy that a lot of people are saying to watch out for, making some early career noise. If he overtakes Anthony Schwartz in this offense, some people even monitor the progression of eventually taking over Donovan Peoples-Jones in this offense. So David Bell is one to watch out for that we're currently not seeing right now. So don't quite lose the picture on David Bell. But lately, outside of David Bell's, with David Bell's absence, and I think Javon Mims is out now. Absence, in the offense right now at training camp. It's really opened the door. Javon Wims, really opened the door, like I said, for Michael Woods and Jakeem Grant to start getting involved and getting some valuable reps in with this offense. And those guys, as of this week, have been starting to make some plays. So this is just a position group that's going to have some battles there, even into the top range, right behind Amari Cooper, to see how those positions shake out come training camp come the start of the season, and which guys are going to get onto the field first. So with all that considered, of course, the tight end room as well, a lot of good things coming from Harrison Bryant, David Njoku, back under contract, finally back under a long-term contract in Cleveland. So he's going to be a force as the starting tight end and a big body, reliable tight end for Jacoby Brissett in the middle of the field to work with as well, and those two guys. So offensively, they have some weapons willing to go in and try to handle the load and get Jacoby Brissett as far as he's going to go this year as the starting quarterback. And Jacoby Brissett, he's been here before. Time and time again, having to take over for quarterbacks. He did it with Tom Brady, did it with Jimmy Garoppolo. Did it in Indianapolis for Andrew Luck, did it in Miami for Tua Tagovailoa, having to come in and be the guy. I have no issue, no concern with Jacoby Brissett coming in and being this guy. When everyone's talked about the 6-game suspension for Deshaun Watson, I immediately looked at the schedule and said, Jacoby Brissett can go 4-2, maybe even 5-1 in those first 6 games without Deshaun Watson. But now we're looking at a longer suspension, so we'll see, what the Browns can do this year. And maybe even with Deshaun Watson out of the picture completely this season, maybe it's just, just float and see what happens throughout the entire season. And that just might be the plan for the Cleveland Browns offense this year. But on the offensive line, they look stacked. No more J.C. Treader. We talked about him being a center option for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in free agency to replace an injured Ryan Jensen. But the Browns replaced him easily with Nick Harris. The rest of their offensive line stays the same. One of the top units in the National Football League, Jack Conklin, Wyatt Teller, Joel Bitonio, Jedrick Wills Jr. They have some great guys on that offensive line that are going to hold up strong and protect Jacoby Brissett this season. And, some good offensive help around at, the weapons arsenal, as you could say, in this Browns offense. So let's talk about the defense now. This is what I'm more interested in. Just talk about the young guys on this defense in Cleveland, and also, the 2 studs on the defensive line, Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett. Those 2 are teaming back up again. They were great together last year. They're going to be great again this year together. I was really happy that the Browns re-signed Jadeveon to make, 2 number 1 overall picks on that defensive line at the edge rusher position is absolutely insane of a duo and combination to go up against. any given week when you face this Browns defense. But Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, he's a beast. I'm wanting to see more out of him this year. Anthony Walker the same way at the middle linebacker positions, and Will linebacker and Jeremiah. But the big thing for me is the secondary and the young guys that I love a lot. Denzel Ward, right now, he's still out of practice. Suffered 7 days ago, last week, a foot injury that he's been kept out of practice from. It's really opened the door for a lot of these young guys at this cornerback position. Greg Newsome, the second, a first-round pick last year out of Northwestern. Greedy Williams out of LSU has come onto the fold. But the big one, Martin Emerson, has had a lot of news. But the one that I've seen a lot of, the last couple of days has been A.J. Green. A.J. Green is really pushing to get some playing time this season in terms of what he can do on the field for the Cleveland Browns this year. So A.J. Brown, an undrafted rookie from last year, coming in and training camp has been balling out. We're going to pull it up here. Let's see if we can grab it here. Some A.J. Green highlights. A.J. Green, the cornerback, not A.J. Green, the wide receiver. A.J. Green, the cornerback, with the Cleveland Browns has been making some headlines. So here we go. We'll see a little bit of some A.J. Green action here. Looks like going up against Josh Rosen at training camp. Getting in, breaking up a pass there on the sideline. So A.J. Green, like I said, has been making a lot of big plays as of late this week, and really, like I said, pushing for some playing time in this deep secondary. And just the young corners that they have. Eventually, hoping to get Denzel Ward back into the fold at practice. Denzel Warden back there in that secondary. But even they got 4 guys who are all considerable playmakers at the safety position as well. John Johnson III, Grant Delpit, Ronnie Harrison, and Richard LeCounte as well. Those guys can all be playmakers for this Browns defense. That secondary is absolutely stacked. They got in some new help in the special teams. Corey Bojorquez is coming in from the Green Bay Packers and drafting Cade York. Draft pick this year at kicker as well from LSU. So revamping that special teams as well. But this Browns team, with Deshaun Watson, they could have been something special this year with Deshaun Watson back in due time. This team is going to be one to watch out for, and not one to overlook by any means in the National Football League, because they have a young roster full of very talented players at every position. And when they get Deshaun Watson back, that's when we're going to have to start worrying about this team. But as for this year, with Jacoby Brissett under center, like I said, this team might just float throughout the entire season until they get Watson back. So not expecting too much, not really expecting playoffs out of the Browns. But it all just depends on what happens tonight with the NFL's appeal with the Deshaun Watson suspension. So that's the Cleveland Browns. Also some news to watch out for. Maybe some more Demetric Felton, Dearness Johnson, some waiver wire guys that were some big heroes last year in fantasy football due to some injuries. Those guys still in place in Cleveland as well. Just do right on the board, and wait till October, late October, November. If anything happens to this Browns running back group, those guys might start getting some action off the waiver wire. So that's the Cleveland Browns. Now let's switch up to our next team, the next big buzz team out of this division, and it's going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. So let's talk about these Yinzers down in Pittsburgh now. Having a quarterback competition, we talked about a quarterback competition last week in Carolina. This quarterback competition has been a little more shaky, it seemed, in Pittsburgh between Mitchell Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, first-round pick out of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh guys staying in Pittsburgh was a big thing in the draft. The only first-round pick quarterback, but they went out in the offseason. They signed Mitchell Trubisky before the draft, and everyone thought, what's going to happen now with the draft, with Mitchell Trubisky being there. Honestly, Mitch Trubisky has handled this like a professional. Came in, understood what happened, with the draft. Kenny Pickett coming on board and understood his role immediately in Pittsburgh. But right now, these two guys battling it out. It looks like Mitchell Trubisky has the advantage so far throughout training camp. A little bit of Mason Rudolph chatter as well with, the players potentially signing more with Mason Rudolph in this offense. But these other two guys are still trying to learn this offense in Pittsburgh and get it, under wraps and in place in terms of being the quarterback for this team. So I would still give Mitchell Trubisky the nod right now to be our Week 1 starter in Pittsburgh. But, like I said, Mitchell Trubisky has handled this like a pro. When they drafted Kenny Pickett in the first round, he understood what was going to happen in training camp. And so far, he said all of the right things and done all of the right things. So we're going to bring it up here. This coming from 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh, it seems. Josh Roundtree, host of the show here, with an interview from Mitchell Trubisky discussing the quarterback competition and helping Kenny Pickett along in this offense.
I think it's just being a great teammate every day, having those conversations in the meeting room, in the locker room, or wherever we're at practice, helping him if he has any questions, and just share my experiences with him. I mean, going into year 6, I have a lot of experience when it comes to training camp, when it comes to learning offenses. So I've seen a lot of defenses. So just having those conversations, it helps me as well, and we're just all trying to push each other. And when we do that, then we all get better.
So there we hear it from Mitchell Trubisky, just trying to be the guy to help Kenny Pickett along, but at the same time knows what he has to do in this offense, and ultimately, fight for his spot to be the starting quarterback for this team in Pittsburgh. So Mitchell Trubisky, he's made some plays. Kenny Pickett has made some plays in training camp. Those two guys are, working along. They're also putting in a little bit of Mason Rudolph, a very much rotation group so far in training camp with this Pittsburgh Steelers team in terms of their quarterback group right now, their quarterback competition. The MVP in the chat from Mitchell Trubisky. But we even have some reps here that we'll try to pull up from yesterday's practice, and this from Mitchell Trubisky, as you can see, hooking up, with newly extended Deontay Johnson, that we'll talk about in a few minutes with his contract. So Mitchell Trubisky's making some plays. I believe had a touchdown yesterday as well to George Pickens in team drills. George Pickens has been coming onto the scene insanely fast in Pittsburgh. It looks like, at the time when Deontay Johnson was having, the issues with his contract situation, it looked like George Pickens, the rookie first year out of Georgia, it looked like George Pickens might be the guy that ends up being the number 1 wide receiver for this team. But Deontay Johnson, back in the fold in Pittsburgh. He's going to be back, starting out the number 1 guy. But George Pickens, eventually he might end up taking over this room and taking over this position in Pittsburgh. So I've liked what I've seen a lot out of George Pickens. But this quarterback competition, I got to give it to Money Mitch right now. Money Mitch looks like he's going to be the guy to be the starter Week 1. I don't know how long it'll be till we see Kenny Pickett. Maybe Mitch Trubisky is able to hold him off maybe the entire season. So I don't really know. This is going to be a very fluid battle, it seems like. Tomlin doesn't seem very, very ecstatic to find his starter, or, in a hurry, I guess you would say, to find his starter for Week 1. But ultimately, they're gonna determine who's gonna be their guy in Pittsburgh. And right now, I would just have to give that nod to Mitchell Trubisky. So, anyways, that's the quarterback competition. Now let's talk about this new extended receiver we have in Pittsburgh as of yesterday. So pull this up. This has been a long battle all offseason long between Deontay Johnson and the Pittsburgh Steelers trying to agree to a new deal. Of course, Deontay Johnson from that draft class that featured A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, all guys that got their big contracts this offseason. But this contract extension from the Pittsburgh Steelers looks a lot different than the money and the years and the guarantees those other guys in that draft class got. But this was the decision they came to in Pittsburgh. This from Mike Garafolo of NFL Network. The Steelers and wide receiver Deontay Johnson have agreed to a 2-year, $36 million extension, sources say. The sides worked last night and this morning, which was yesterday, to end his hold-in with a shorter deal than we've seen from others and allows him to be a free agent again after the 2024 season. So this one was honestly unexpected for me. I personally expected no contract to happen with the Deontay Johnson front from Pittsburgh. I expected the Pittsburgh Steelers to pretty much do what the Steelers do and let Deontay Johnson walk. Don't give him another contract, ride him out to the end of the contract, and let him walk in free agency. It's what we've seen time and time again from the Steelers. I was secretly hoping for a trade to the Green Bay Packers, but ultimately they get a deal done. It's great for Deontay. He has now 2 more years in Pittsburgh to play, you would think, with Mitchell Trubisky, and then play a year with Kenny Pickett, and then go into free agency and try to get a bigger deal, more in line of what these other wide receivers got this offseason. So ultimately, big deal. Big, win for the Steelers keeping Deontay Johnson, and honestly, big win for Deontay Johnson getting some money now, understanding his role with this team, understanding his market as well, and being able to build on it, his career these next 2 years and go back into free agency in 2024 and try for a bigger contract then. So that's what we saw from Deontay Johnson. And, the rest of the wide receiver position, George Pickens, I'm really excited about him. Chase Claypool, Mapletron will be Mapletron. I'm not too high on him personally in terms of like a fantasy football perspective, but I still think he can be a weapon well utilized within this offense. Pat Freiermuth will be a great one as well, second-year tight end in Pittsburgh. I want to talk about Najee. Najee Harris last year saw one of the biggest workloads in the National Football League, and this year, with a new quarterback situation in the fold, is it going to happen? I mean, does Najee get even more of a workload? Last year, okay, actually we'll pull this up here for some perspective. List of every rookie in NFL history to have 300 carries and 70 receptions. Najee Harris. Najee Harris is the only one in NFL history to have 300 carries and 70 receptions in their rookie year. He did that last year, and this is what I'm talking about. Is he going to have even bigger of a role in 2022 from what he was able to do last season? I honestly think he does. I really like Najee Harris in the first round. I easily see him being a top 5 pick, and if I'm at 5, I'm taking Najee if he's still on the board. Last year, he had 1,200 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns on 307 carries. 74 receptions is the total numbers for what he did last year. He falls off this year for sure. I don't know. I mean, this offensive line has some, losses this offseason. Doesn't look as strong. But honestly, Najee is a beast. I think Najee is a beast and ultimately can handle this workload. They didn't add much behind him. Benny Snell Jr., Anthony McFarland Jr., still those guys behind him with this offense. But, I mean, yeah, this offensive line, Okorafor, James Daniels, Mason Cole, Kevin Dotson, Dan Moore, they don't look like the strongest group, but I still think Najee Harris can be that guy with this offense to have, another 1,000-yard year, to build upon what he did as a rookie. Now, I don't know if the stats are better for Najee Harris, but I think he gets more of a workload. I think he gets the ball a lot more in this offense. Maybe Mitchell Trubisky tries to pass the ball a lot more than Ben Roethlisberger did, but I still think they use a healthy dose of Najee Harris within this offense in year 2. And that, for one, is something I'm excited about with this offense from a fantasy football perspective. With this Steelers offense, Najee is the guy that I'm targeting and looking for in this offense. So now for this defense, big boost today this week in practice. Minkah Fitzpatrick returning, dealt with a wrist injury, fell off a bike, but he was back, non-football related injury, but he is back at practice. So it's great having having Minkah back out there, being a force and a leader on that defensive front. But I mean, they still have some absolute dogs and menaces on this defense, guys. Like a Devin Bush, like a TJ Watt, like a Cameron Hayward. These guys are absolute beasts on this defense and will be again this year. Last year, TJ Watt nearly broke the sack record. I believe tied the sack record last year. He's going to be that same type of guy this year on this defensive line. Cameron Hayward is as dominant as ever, consistently every single year. Bringing in Devin Bush was a huge addition for this defense. That was a super underrated free agent signing. Miles Jack, was a super underrated free agent signing. Devin Bush, draft pick of the Steelers, a Pittsburgh homer, has always been consistent as well. I'm mostly talking about Miles Jack. Miles Jack, a huge underrated signing from the Jacksonville Jaguars coming into the Steelers this year. But, still got guys, Cameron Sutton, Akilo Witherspoon will lock things down. In the secondary with Minkah Fitzpatrick and Terrell Edmonds. This defense looks as great as ever. They got some big input this year with Brian Flores entering in now as a defensive assistant with this team and coming into it. So this Steelers team, ultimately, in terms of what they have on their roster, they got a lot of guys who Tomlin will have to make it work with. And Mike Tomlin never has losing seasons. Always, is in the 8-win plus caliber with his team and with his guys. Tomlin gets them in tip-top shape and everything, time and time again, no matter who he's working with. But there's some guys where Matt Canada and Mike Tomlin with this offense can make things work. Brian Flores with his defense can get things figured out as well. With Terrell Austin, their defensive coordinator, but Brian Flores being the senior defensive assistant. They have a lot of guys with a lot of experience running this defense, running this offense. So I'm ready to see, what they can do, because ultimately this could be a wild card team. In not a wild card playoff team, but a wild card team where we don't know where they can flip flop this year. Can Mitchell Trubisky, get back into the playoffs? We're talking about a guy who dominated that one season with the Chicago Bears. I believe it was like a 12-14 win team, with the Chicago Bears leading them into the playoffs with Matt Nagy as his head coach. He's been now sitting behind Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills for the last 2 seasons, and now getting a shot again as a starting quarterback. I believe he takes the reins, like I said, by week 1. Najee Harris is going to, lighten the workload for this team. So the Steelers are a team to be excited about, but not one to be overly optimistic about either this season. So that's, my outlook on this Pittsburgh Steelers squad. I want to see what they can do. I'm never going to doubt Mike Tomlin. I don't want to bet against Mike Tomlin. But, they're going to have to fight and crawl again this season. But I ultimately see, maybe a push for a late playoff spot this season if they can start stacking some wins and get on a roll up there in Pittsburgh. So that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's now move on to the next team to discuss on today's agenda in the AFC North, and that will be the Baltimore Ravens. So the Baltimore Ravens, the first thing to talk about in Baltimore has to be quarterback Lamar Jackson. Still dealing with a contract situation. Back at he's at practice. It's not a full-on holdout by any means. But Kyler Murray got his contract most recently at the quarterback position. We're still in a wait-and-see scenario with Lamar Jackson in the deal that he will get. Will he even get one from the Baltimore Ravens? Will he get one before the season starts? Will he have to wait till next year with Lamar Jackson? This is just going to be a very interesting situation. I mean, Lamar Jackson is pretty much representing himself in this, scenario and whole, potential new contract conversation with the Baltimore Ravens. It seems like Lamar Jackson is ready to go into the season and play without a contract this year. And ultimately, try to bet on himself this year. But, that's, a big storyline to watch out for in Baltimore. I've seen a lot of mixed input, a lot of mixed reviews in terms of the Lamar Jackson contract extension. And, if he can stay in Baltimore, as he should, being, the franchise quarterback of this team. You pay your franchise quarterbacks, rightfully so. But this is an interesting, dilemma and conversation right now going on in Baltimore. With John Harbaugh, with this team, and with their quarterback in Lamar Jackson. So the question is, from my perspective, will we see this contract go down before the season? I'm on the limb of saying no. I'm more on the line of, the Lamar Jackson bet on himself type of deal. So what does that look like he's got to get to the playoffs. Lamar Jackson has to get this team back into the playoffs. He has to have a fully healthy season, back to his MVP level that he had, I believe, in 2019, and back to that level of play, and ultimately win another playoff game, go on a playoff run with this Baltimore Ravens team. That is what's going to get you a contract in Baltimore in a long-term top tier quarterback money deal that you would think he is looking for on this second contract. So the person that is going to help him in this offense is going to be Rashad Bateman at wide receiver. He's taken the reins now as his number one wide receiver in this offense. I'm excited to see what he can do in this role. After they traded Marquise Hollywood Brown to the Arizona Cardinals back on draft day, back in April, that gave full wave for Rashad Bateman to be the number one wide receiver in this offense. A lot of reports coming out of training camp in Baltimore have said that Rashad Bateman looks the part of being that number one wide receiver, but is ultimately just trying to get over the hump and get over to some consistency issues, being that number one wide receiver in practice. And I think he might be well on his way. Once the season starts, I think he'll start getting more comfortable in that role. They just have to make sure to keep him healthy. Already dealing with some minor injuries in practice, so getting him back into the in tip-top shape and at wide receiver 1 level will be a huge addition for Lamar Jackson. Mark Andrews probably going to be his top target again this year. Easily going to be a top 3 tight end in fantasy. Target him early on in your drafts. Outside of those two guys, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tylan Wallace, not guys I'm really ecstatic about, and they didn't really add anything to this room. And to their offensive weapons to help out Lamar Jackson and give him some credit to try to go on a run this year while playing for a contract extension from the Baltimore Ravens. But offensive line stays in place. Bringing in a rookie center in Tyler Linderbaum. They got Kevin Zeitler, Tyree Phillips, Ronnie Stanley, Morgan Moses. Those guys are all there. Great front five. Daniel Falele, Ben Cleveland, Ben Powers have some great depth at the offensive line as well to surround Lamar Jackson in this offense. The big thing for this offense is going to be the running back room. What are these running backs going to get on the field? And are these running backs going to be on the field in week 1? That's the big question right now in Baltimore is when are we going to see J.K. Dobbins return, and when are we going to see Gus Edwards return? We do have some rehab updates from John Harbaugh from yesterday to talk about. It looks like we're going to see maybe a little bit of J.K. Dobbins, back in some form at practice. Not fully practice by any means, but he will, hopefully be back on the field doing, some drills in a limited capacity on Monday. John Harbaugh said J.K. Dobbins is making a hurry to get back on the field, but ultimately Gus Edwards is a little further behind J.K. Dobbins, so I don't think we see J.K. Dobbins, I don't think we see Gus Edwards in week 1. J.K. Dobbins, however, might get back into the fold. There's a good little Twitter banter back and forth between J.K. Dobbins and Ian Rappaport about his status for week 1, but J.K. Dobbins is going to be the one coming in, the week of week 1. Expect him to have, a questionable status going into the first game of the season, and ultimately looks like he's probably, week 1 will probably end up being a game time decision, if I'm going to say right now early on. But, if we're seeing him back in practice on Monday, that'll be a big move for J.K. Dobbins, trying to, make a push back to get back before the start of the season. Gus Edwards, however, it looks like he's a lot farther out in terms of getting back on the field. But the Ravens added some assurance at the position. They brought in Mike Davis right before training camp, at the very start of training camp, coming in, a free agent sign. Last year spent the year with the Atlanta Falcons, so maybe see some Mike Davis in week 1 in terms of the running back position with this offense. But J.K. Dobbins, he's eventually going to get right, and he's going to eventually be the big role player in this entire offense, and utilizing him in terms of what he can do on the field. So that's just the look for, the lookout right now with J.K. Dobbins. A rookie last year had 800 yards, 9 touchdowns. In 2020, last year didn't get to see him in Baltimore, so trying to get him back onto the field now will be a big thing for this offense. So that's what we have for the offense in Baltimore. We got to talk about the defense now as well. Move the page and turn to the other side of the ball. In Baltimore, Odafe Oweh looks like an absolute beast on that defensive line going into year 2. That guy, right now in practice, he looks like the biggest guy in practice. He's moving like the biggest, strongest guy in practice. The shoulder looks great. He looks absolutely phenomenal. And now that they had David Ojabo signed, finally making it all of the draft picks signed this year, if they can get David Ojabo on the field, With Calais Campbell, with Tyus Bauer, with Patrick Queen, they have some guys who are going to be some absolute menaces on this defensive front. In Baltimore, they got some stellar talent in the secondary as well. Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, Kyle Fuller, Marcus Williams, Chuck Clark, and then you add in rookie Kyle Hamilton as well. Kyle Hamilton has had a little bit of a tough go in practice. It looked like the last day of practice, most recent practice, Kyle Hamilton limped off the field, was dealing with some issues, I think with his back, and then came back in, started limping off the field. There's the big play we saw a couple weeks ago in practice. Kyle Hamilton getting burned by a practice squad player, undrafted free agent, potential practice squad player. We can actually pull that one up for us. We can see that play. We got to show it. It's a funny one to show from the Ravens practice. But here, Kyle Hamilton, see here lined up with 29, just blows right past him in practice. Not a good look. But we saw what the rookie can do from Notre Dame, and you win some, you lose some. That's just training camp for you, and practice in general. So he's still going to be another impact player to move around as a defensive chess piece, if you will, in that secondary. Patrick Queen, honestly, is the one out of this entire defense I want to see step up and make another step forward in terms of a production in this defense. But nevertheless, at the end of it, this is a top-tier unit in terms of defenses as a whole in the National Football League. Justin Madubuike, Michael Pierce as well, two names that we also didn't mention on this defense. They have great guys, superb, talented monsters on this defense in Baltimore who will absolutely be ready to play come week one and will torment opposing offenses week in and week out, and ultimately will be the reason that this team, in my opinion, has a shot to take back this division throne in the AFC North, and they are my preseason favorites to do so. Even if the Cincinnati Bengals just are coming off a Super Bowl berth and playing in the Super Bowl back in February, I still think right now it looks like the Baltimore Ravens. They look like as a whole in the preseason. Right now, when you look at their roster, they look like they have the strongest put together roster in this division once they get Dobbins back into the fold and Lamar Jackson, playing for himself this year, betting on himself this year for a new contract. I like the hungry Lamar. I like this hungry defense playing for John Harbaugh in Baltimore at the end of it for me. So one more team, and then we'll wrap it up and get out of here for this NFL season preview. We got to talk about the team we just mentioned. The Cincinnati Bengals, last year's AFC champs, last year's AFC representatives in the Super Bowl. Let's talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. Who they? Right now, the Bengals, honestly, for me, are they going to avoid the Super Bowl hangover? I see a big regression from the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm going to have a lot of hate and a lot of heat for this take. I have already gotten it a lot. I see regression from the Cincinnati Bengals unit this year. I just don't think that they are, going to be able to replicate what they did last year. This season, I don't think they should have been there last year, but they got there. So at the end of the day, yes, they were there. But this year, I think that there's going to be regression. But still, Joe Burrow, Joey B, proclaimed to be one of the top quarterbacks in the National Football League. I can see it. I can see both ways. I have my stance on, the entire situation. But Joe Burrow is still a dog at the quarterback position, throwing to Jamar Chase. The year 2 of Jamar Chase, what are we going to see out of him in year 2? Another look out of him, a full season on tape out of Jamar Chase going into year 2. But still, this wide receiver room looks absolutely stacked for the the Cincinnati Bengals. T. Higgins is incredible. Tyler Boyd, slightly has gone down from what he was in Cincinnati, but still, being a number 3 in this offense, he's one of the best number 3s in the National Football League. Still at the end of the day. But T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd running out this offense. They're bringing in Hayden Hurst at tight end, moving on from C.J. Uzomah, losing him in free agency. But the big thing in Cincinnati when you talk about this offense is, the ultimate, kryptonite of what they were able to face in the Super Bowl, and what ultimately caused them to lose that Super Bowl at the end of it was the offensive line. Tried to revamp again this year for the second year in a row, and Operation Protect Joe Burrow, their number 1 overall pick from last season. They got some new help, 2 seasons ago. New help coming in Lael Collins coming in at tackle, and Alex Kappa coming in at guard. Lael Collins coming over from the Dallas Cowboys. Alex Kappa coming in from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to help round out this offensive line with Ted Karras, Jackson Carman, Jonah Williams. It looks like for the first time in Joe Burrow's career, he has a stable front 5 on the offensive line to surround himself with. However, at practice, there has been some worries with this offensive line, how well they have played, but ultimately how much of that is on, maybe Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson, being just absolute menaces on that defensive front, with DJ Redder, with BJ Hill, those guys being at practice, making life tough for this offensive line, and making sure that, they build it, fight iron with, iron meets iron type of situation on that, in the trenches in Cincinnati. So that's just, what we have. The new faces on the offensive line, which I'm excited to see how, well they step up and help this unit out, in this offense out, in Lael Collins and Alex Kappa. I'm excited to see more of Joe Mixon. Of course, I'm excited to see Jamar Chase. He was an electrifying player last year as a rookie. This year, last year, almost 1,500 yards receiving and 13 touchdowns. My God, what he was able to do last year as a rookie. But this year, blatant honestly, Jamar Chase is still going to be an easy top 10 receiver, and top 5 wide receiver in the National Football League this year. I just don't think he has a near 1,500 yard season. I don't think he has a 13 touchdown season that he did last year. But I want Joe Burrow. I'm pushing this out there because I want the Bengals, and I want Joe Burrow to prove me wrong. I want them to prove me wrong and do it again next year is what I'm excited for from this Bengals team, is getting them to shut me up pretty much, with Jamar Chase, with Burrow, with this team. But Burrow, he is, cracking me up in terms of what he's been doing. So he ended up getting his appendix removed, hasn't been practicing with the team. But what he is able to do, here we go, pull it up here at practice, just absolutely cracking me up from Joe Burrow at practice. So here we see, looks like in the practice, the team having to run here, do some sprints at practice, and look at that, Joe Burrow on his cart, sprinting with the team on the cart. I saw it the other day, and just absolutely knew, saw it yesterday, and just knew I had to bring that into the show at some point today. So this offense in Cincinnati, passing game was going to look incredible with Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd. I am, expecting some slight regression, but at the same time, I'm giving them the challenge of proving me wrong and shutting me up. But I do want to see what ends up happening with the running back room. How much usage does Joe Mixon get this year? How involved do Samaje Perine and Chris Evans get this year in that backfield as well? Will be something worth monitoring from the Cincinnati Bengals team. So I talked about, no Joe Burrow at practice. The defense in that regard has been showing out against the backups at practice against, Brandon Allen, Jake Browning, and those guys on that defense absolutely have been balling out. I talked about Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard on that defensive line, making things, a hard time for the offensive line. But even in the secondary, a lot of big things from Dax Hill, the first-round pick out of Michigan, Chidobe Awuzie still there, Mike Hilton, Eli Apple. Say what you want about Eli Apple. But without, Jesse Bates, who is the defensive leader of this group, who has not been practicing right now with the Bengals, they are still lighting it up for this offense in Cincinnati so far throughout training camp. From all the reports I have read, this defense has been the unit that is really starting to show up in Cincinnati, which honestly excites me in terms of this team next year. I want to see an improvement on the offensive line, and I want to see improvement from this defense. Absolutely light some teams up this year and really start proving themselves as a contender and a surefire contender for the second year in a row in Cincinnati. I'm really excited about Dax Hill and how they used him around, especially once, eventually once they get Jesse Bates back into the fold in that secondary. Dax Hill is going to be an absolute beast the way that they're going to be able to move him around. And Jesse Bates, one of the top players, true safeties at his position in terms of what he's able to do as well. So the last thing we have from this Bengals team, Evan McPherson might be the best kicker in the National Football League this year. In his second year in the National Football League, I think he might be the best kicker in the National Football League. He's going to rival Justin Tucker next year for sure. I mean, he is on a tear right now in practice. I don't think he's missed anything in practice so far. And we're going to bring up just a monster, kick that he had, back earlier this week in the jungle in front of the fans, firing them up. We're going to pull this up here from Evan McPherson. An absolute rocket of a leg that this young guy has on him. 65 yards. Easy 65 yards at practice. Listen to the fans absolutely freaking roaring in Cincinnati. I love that guy. I love McPherson. I think he's going to be a top 3 kicker this year and have a shot to be the best kicker in the National Football League in the second year this year. So I'm excited about Evan McPherson. But real quick, before we get out of here, it looks like we have some news coming in on the Deshaun Watson situation. So while we're here discussing it, back at Jeff Darlington, so NFLPA says we have filed our reply brief to the NFL's appeal regarding the Deshaun Watson matter. Jeff Darlington says, and there you have it. Not major news here, but Roger Goodell's designee, Peter Harvey, now has all the information at his disposal to write his ruling on the appeal. NFL did not give me a timeline for a decision, but they did say they recognize it needs to be just bounce right off that. But yeah, it's expeditious. There we go. So that's what we have from the coming in from the breaking news here on the Deshaun Watson matter in terms of what we have here. So that's what we have. Breaking news on the Deshaun Watson front. We'll see what happens and what the NFL's ruling will be as we wrap things up. So that is it for today's show. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for stopping by. If you enjoyed today's episode, go ahead and hit the like button. If you have not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so as well. It supports us immensely here on the Slaw Sports Show. But thank you all for joining. Thank you all for stopping by. If you missed any part of today's episode, it will be posted on the YouTube channel at the Slaw Sports Show and on our podcast as well. Anywhere you get a podcast at the Slaw Sports Show. We have one more, division, one more week to go for our season previews. NFC North next week here on the Slaw Sports Show. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you all for joining, and until next time.